Clarity Clinical Solutions.
When a pharmaceutical company spends over $1 billion developing a new drug, how do they protect that investment? How do they stop competitors from simply copying their work the moment the drug hits the market? The answer is a complex system of intellectual property laws, patents, data exclusivity, and trade secrets that together determine who can sell a drug, for how long, and at what price. This system is the engine that funds pharmaceutical innovation, and it is also the reason many life-saving drugs remain unaffordable for millions of people around the world. There are three main types of intellectual property protection in the pharmaceutical industry. First, patents. These give the inventor the exclusive right to make, use, and sell their invention for 20 years from the filing date. Second, data exclusivity, a regulatory protection that prevents generic companies from relying on the original manufacturer's clinical trial data when seeking approval for a copycat drug. And third, trade secrets, manufacturing know-how and production processes that can be kept confidential indefinitely. Each type of protection serves a different purpose and lasts for a different length of time. Patents and data exclusivity are often confused, but they are very different things. Patents are granted by patent offices like the USPTO in the United States. They protect the invention itself, the molecule, the formulation, or the method of use. Patents can be challenged in court and invalidated. Data exclusivity is granted by drug regulators like the FDA. It protects the clinical trial data that the manufacturer submitted to prove the drug is safe and effective. Generic companies cannot simply reference that data during the exclusivity period. Data exclusivity cannot be challenged in court, it is purely a regulatory barrier. They run concurrently, but serve as two independent layers of protection. There are four main categories of drug patents. The strongest is the compound patent, which protects the specific molecule itself. This is usually the first patent filed and the hardest to challenge. Next is the formulation patent, which covers the specific way the drug is delivered, a tablet, a capsule, an extended-release injection. Then there is the method of use patent, which protects a specific medical use of the drug, allowing companies to patent new uses of existing drugs. And finally, process patents cover the method of manufacturing the drug. By filing multiple types of patents at different times, companies can extend their effective market exclusivity well beyond the original 20-year patent term. The life cycle of a drug patent typically spans 20 to 25 years, but most of that time is spent in development, not on the market. A drug's compound patent is usually filed 10 to 15 years before the drug receives regulatory approval. The patent application is published 18 months after filing, so competitors can see what is being developed. It takes another 2 to 5 years for the patent office to examine and grant the patent. By the time the drug reaches patients, there are typically only 8 to 12 years of patent life remaining. When the patent expires, generic competitors flood the market, and the brand name drug's revenue drops by 80 to 90% within months, what the industry calls the patent cliff. The patent cliff is one of the most significant forces in the pharmaceutical industry. Over $200 billion in annual drug revenue is expected to lose patent protection between 2025 and 2030. Some of the biggest drugs in history are facing this cliff, including Keytruda, the cancer immunotherapy that generates over $25 billion a year, and blood thinners like Eliquis and Xarelto. When the first generic version of these drugs hits the market, the brand typically loses 80 to 90% of its revenue within 12 months. For biologics, the erosion is slower but still dramatic. Biosimilars typically capture 30 to 50% of the market in the first year. There is a critical distinction between traditional small molecule generics and biosimilars. Small molecule generics are chemically identical copies of the brand drug, with the same active ingredient. They can be approved through a simple abbreviated New Drug Application, or ANDA, which only requires proof of bioequivalence, meaning the generic releases the same amount of drug into the bloodstream at the same rate. This costs $2 to $5 million to develop. Biosimilars are completely different. Biologics are complex proteins made in living cells, so no generic can be an exact copy. A biosimilar must prove it is highly similar through extensive analytical studies, animal studies, and clinical immunogenicity testing. It costs $100 to $300 million to develop a biosimilar, and takes 5 to 9 years. The modern generic drug industry was created by a single piece of legislation, the Hatch-Waxman Act of 1984, also known as the Drug Price Competition and Patent Term Restoration Act. Before Hatch-Waxman, generic manufacturers had to repeat the same full clinical trials that the original brand conducted, making generics almost as expensive as the brand drug. The act created the abbreviated New Drug Application, or ANDA, which only requires a bioequivalence study. It also introduced the Paragraph 4 certification, allowing generic companies to challenge a brand's patent before it expires. And it offered a powerful incentive, 180 days of market exclusivity for the first generic company to successfully challenge a patent. Data exclusivity periods vary dramatically by country. In the United States, the FDA grants 5 years of data exclusivity for a new chemical entity, 3 years for new formulations or indications, and 12 years for biologic drugs under the Biologics Price Competition and Innovation Act. The European Union uses an 8+2+1 model, 8 years of data exclusivity, 2 years of market exclusivity, and an extra year if the drug is approved for a new indication. India has no data exclusivity at all. Canada provides 8 years. And China, which introduced data exclusivity only in 2018, provides 6 years. These differences create significant variation in when generics can enter different markets. The battle between brand name and generic drug companies is a high-stakes strategic tug-of-war. On the brand side, companies use every legal tool to maximize their patent life. They file secondary patents on formulation, dosing, and combinations. They create patent thickets, dozens of overlapping patents around a single drug that competitors must individually challenge. They pay generic companies to delay market entry through pay-for-delay settlements. And they switch patients to a newer formulation just before the original patent expires. On the generic side, companies challenge weak patents through Paragraph 4 filings, race to be first to file for the 180-day exclusivity, design around secondary patents, and sometimes launch their product before the litigation is settled. The economic impact of generic competition is enormous. When the first generic version of a drug enters the market, prices typically drop 30 to 80%. With multiple generic entrants, prices fall by 85% or more. In 2022, generic drugs saved the United States healthcare system about $366 billion. And generics now account for nearly 90% of all prescriptions dispensed in the United States by volume, yet they represent only about 20% of total drug spending. This is the fundamental value proposition. Patents fund innovation with high prices during the exclusivity period, and then generic competition makes those same medicines affordable for everyone. Evergreening is the practice of extending a drug's commercial exclusivity by obtaining new patents as older ones expire, without truly innovating. The classic example is Nexium, which was essentially a purified version of the older drug Prilosec, allowing AstraZeneca to extend its acid reflux franchise by years. Companies also create patent thickets. AbbVie filed over 100 patents on Humira, making it incredibly expensive for biosimilar competitors to challenge each one in court. Pay-for-delay agreements are another controversial strategy, where the brand pays the generic company tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to delay launching their product. The FTC estimates these deals cost American consumers over $3 billion a year. Intellectual property rules vary significantly around the world. The United States has some of the strongest patent protections and the longest biologic data exclusivity at 12 years, contributing to higher drug prices but also robust innovation. At the other end of the spectrum is India, whose Section 3D of the Patent Act prevents evergreening by requiring significantly enhanced efficacy for new patents, which is why India became known as the pharmacy of the developing world for producing affordable HIV/AIDS medications. The WTO's TRIPS agreement sets minimum standards, but it allows flexibility. Countries can issue compulsory licenses to override patents for public health emergencies. The Doha Declaration of 2001 explicitly affirmed that public health should take priority over intellectual property rights. So here is the bottom line. Strong intellectual property protection is essential for pharmaceutical innovation. Without the promise of patent exclusivity and the enormous profits it can generate, no company would invest the $1 billion+ needed to develop a new drug. But without generic competition, those drugs would remain permanently unaffordable. The genius of the system, when it works well, is the balance it strikes: a limited period of high prices to fund innovation, followed by open competition to make medicines affordable. Getting this balance right is one of the most important challenges in healthcare policy, with life-changing consequences for patients everywhere.